Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to start the second poetry evening with Professor Salman Akhtar in Riga. We had the first one 7 years ago, and Angela promised me already that we will have the third in 7 years.
Perfect.
And this just reminds me that you have also, like Goethe, 7-year cyclus.
Yes.
He also was very productive in between 7 years and his deep depressions. Last time you had dialogue in poetry with poems with our great
Yes.
translator and poet Ivars Steinbergs, who unfortunately is not between us, but we found for you another person to be interesting in exchange, and this is Ivars Steinbergs, who is a poet of new generation, star in the Latvian sky of poetry, follower of all these works, and also writes and translates. Angela already told a lot of good words about you and your family. Just I would like maybe to add that you are coming from very distinguished Indian family, and some very close relatives in your family were poets and writers, and this is really deep tradition to play with the word and to play with the language. And Professor Salman writes in 2 languages, in English and Urdu. So let's start our poetry afternoon, and maybe we will start with you, Ivars.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, esteemed professor, dear guests. Hello, my name is indeed Ivars. I am a poet, and I'm very happy to be here today. And I am thankful to the organizers for involving me and giving me the opportunity to spend the last couple of weeks translating Professor Akhtar's poetry. Today, I think we will just mostly be reading, because I think we have a lot of texts to get through. Namely, I translated poems from 2 collections of poetry, The Freshness of the Child and After Landing. I'll be very happy to share the translations with you, but I have also been asked to share some of my own poems as well, and it just so happens that a couple of them have been recently translated into English. So we will read the original English poems and the translations in Latvian, and then the original Latvian poems and the translations into English. So it's a 2-way bilingual reading. But before we begin, I wanted to pay homage to the great Ivars Steinbergs, who was Professor Akhtar's translator 7 years ago when they had a poetry reading. Was it in Istaba? Yeah, it was in the center of Riga in a cafe. This is much more formal than Istaba, but I don't mind. And all this was, in my opinion, not just one of the most original, or if not the most original poets of the late 20th century in Latvia, and also the most original translator of his generation, but he was also personally to me quite possibly the greatest inspiration, and therefore I'm very humbled and I feel very lucky to be here today. So I wanted to start with a poem by Ivars Steinbergs. I will read first the text in Latvian, and then there is a translation by Ieva Lešinska in English. The poem is called Odessa, Freidista motīvs. Vasaras naktī, rāmā vasaras naktī. Jā, kļuvāt par jūrnieku, lai mātei pārvestu neilona kažoku, vai lai nebūtu jāskata tēva baltie zobi, viņa pašapmierinātais, smaidīgais mūlis, bez nevienas krunciņas. Vimpeli mastā tik bizināt no krasta uz krastu, O, pie jūsu bērnības pieredzes tas tikpat nenovēršami kā pie psihoanalītiķa pārteikties. Dzīvība dzima jūrā, un kolektīvā zemapziņa sauc atpakaļ. Vai gēnu atmiņa, kā tagad saka. Okeāns ir nakts pods, ko upes piečurā. Odessa, Freudist motif. On summer's night, a quiet summer's night. Yes, you became a sailor to bring your mother a nylon coat. Or so you wouldn't have to stare at your father's white teeth, his self-satisfied smiling mug. Oh, sure, smooth, without wrinkles. Just to whisk the pennant from coast to coast. Oh, your childhood warrants that as surely as to make slips with the shrink. Life came from the sea, and the collective subconscious is calling it back. Or it's the genetic memory, as they call it now. The ocean is a chamber pot for the rivers to piss in. Translated from the Latvian by Ieva Leshinskaya. And thank you. And I know that after meeting Uldis in 2017, you wrote a poem dedicated dedicated to Uldis Bērziņš. Would it be possible to, if we start the reading with your dedication?
I have to find it.
Yes, it's from Freshness of the Child. Yeah, I have the translation here. Yes.
Okay. I was just going to find the page number.
I think it was the first poem I translated from this book out of interest. And
So should I read in English? You follow Latvian or vice versa?
I think you should read it in English, and then I'll read the translation. Yes.
So this is a poem that I wrote after meeting Mr. Uldis Bērziņš, but not immediately. Actually, almost a year later, or maybe more, because there's something called what Freud described as deferred emotion. Some things are so powerful they cannot be felt and mentalized right then. It takes time for the unconscious and preconscious to process it, and then one day you're ready for it. So the poem was written, I think, I met him on May 20th, 2017. So almost exactly 7 years ago. But the poem was written, I think this book is published when? 2018. So at least a year, maybe a little after. Okay, so this poem is called A Pocket Full of Awe. Awe, A-W-E. A Pocket Full of Awe. Half Lear, half Hemingway. Half Lear, half Hemingway, three skies above the curious souls who gathered to listen to him. His voice rising, falling, breaking, pausing, causing giddy titters and lumps in throats, a whisper of disbelief, a moan of pleasure, a sigh of relief. One moment, a restless ocean, mad and frothing. The next, a misplaced treasure, a yelp of grief. A broken leaf on the wind's shoulders, floating out of the sight and then returning miraculously and lodging itself on the open palm of the heart.
Pilna kabata jūsmas. Latviešu izcilo dzejnieku Uldi Bērziņu satiekot 2017. gada 20. maijā. Puse Līrs, puse Hemingvejs. Trīs debesis augstāk par ziņkārajām dvēselēm, kas pulkā ausās. Balss ceļas, krīt, lūst, izsus, tatraisas, kurbas, smejas, dzen kamolu kaklā, neticības čuksts. Baudas gauda, miera nopūta. Vienbrīd viļņu jūra, neprāts un putas, tad apslēptā manta, sēru smilksts. Plaisaina lapele vēja plecos, izpeld ārpus skata, lai brīnums atgrieztos, piezemējoties sirds pavērtajā plaukstā. Thank you very much. I have planned to read some of my poems later when we go through some other poems in Freshness of the Child, but I wanted to use the opportunity to read a 6-line long poem of mine in Latvian. Unfortunately, this poem has not been translated into English. So for those of you who only understand English, I hope it can give you some aesthetic pleasure musically, perhaps. But this is a poem I wrote thinking about how Uldis Bērziņš was one of the first poets in Latvian literature to appropriate the form of the ghazal, the poetry form in
Persia.
Yeah.
Originating in Persia.
Yeah. And it's not a ghazal, but I was thinking about this tradition and Uldis. So it's Ulža Bērziņa motif or Ulža Bērziņa motīvs. Dzeru sausu, nenobīstos, vārdus guldzu īstos, mute plati vaļā matejam, reģis runā malā attejam. Ko tu plāties, Mārtiņ, Matīs, bet pielīp vārds, vairs nenokratīs. Thank you. Now,
allow me to say two things. One, boring and didactic. One, I believe, very interesting. And I may be wrong. The boring may be interesting and interesting may be boring. One never knows. The boring thing first, so that we end on good note. Boring thing is that the particular genre of poetry he just mentioned, Mr. Steinberg, just mentioned, ghazal has a particular rule. It has very strict rules. The strict rules are that line 1, line 2, and then alternate lines 4, 6, 8, 10 must have a refrain which can be one word or 2 or 3 or 4, but literally the same word. Line 1, line 2, then 4, 6, 8, 10, same word. Or same set of words, same, no change. And immediately before the refrain, one word that rhymes. So it'll go, Dile nada tujhe hua kya hai? Dile nada tujhe hua kya hai? Aakhir is dard ki dawa kya hai? Kya hai is the same. Hua kya hai? Dawa kya hai? So there's a rhyming word, there's a refrain. This is the structure of ghazal. It originated in Persia, but is also taken over greatly by Indian Urdu poetry. So this was the boring part. The fun part applies to you right now. You said that even if you don't understand, you'll have some phonetic and aesthetic pleasure of listening. I remember a long time ago, the Russian poet by the name of Joseph Brodsky, who won a Nobel Prize, he came to Philadelphia, and his main translator, Mr. Nathan Klein, was a professor at Bryn Mawr College, and I went to listen to him. And before you entered, they were selling his book, so I bought his book, and I sat there with the book open, and they had an alternate arrangement. Brodsky will stand up, recite a poem, sit down, and then Nathan Klein will read the same poem in English. The fact is, when he read in English, I understood. But when he read in Russian, I enjoyed it much more. Partly because when he was reciting, because there's something in reciting poetry which is not in reading or poetry. Because the poetry is uses words not only for their denotative nominal value, but for their connotative value, for their kindling potential, for their historical layering, for their sound, for their weight, for their musicality, number of things. So as a result, when he recited, it was so different from when it was translated in English. That's why poetry never travels very well across cultures and across languages. I remember especially, and obviously it has some personal idiosyncratic meanings also, I loved a poem of his about his best friend's death. And his best friend's nickname was Babbo. So he will, refrain will come after 3, 4 lines. He'll again said, this happened, this happened, this happened, but Babbo is dead. This happened, this happened, this happened, but Babbo is dead. So when Nathan Klein will say, but Babbo is dead, okay, I felt something. But when Brodsky says, Babbo mritva, then you felt completely shocked and pained as to how powerful that expression was. And Ulrich Berzins had this capacity to convey the sentiment with musicality, and so do you. You know, that you read so well, like Kafi Saab, there's a great Urdu poet. You know, not all poets know how to read. You know, some people make the accusation that the person only reads good, it's not a good poem. He just reads well. No, what this great poet in India said to me when I said people object to, they say, you just know how to read very well, but your poetry is not really good. He says, but reading is part of the poetry. Then when you're reading, that is also the poem. And that's a very interesting point.
Thank you for those comments. And Uldis was one of the rare cases when he was not just very well educated as a philologist, but he was very creative and responsible at the same time as a translator.
Yes.
So it is a very demanding requirement for translators if they are to be good translators. They have to not just be responsible, but also to add some creativity to what they're doing. Otherwise, it will always be like the original is just always better when recited.
Now, the trouble with me is that I'm too full of stories. So you reminded me of another thing. The famous poem, which I'm sure you know, many people know, famous poem by Rilke called The Panther. Now, Panther has been translated by many people. And there was an article which I thought I'll never be able to find. I was mistaken because I was talking in front of people who were 20 years old or 21 years old. They produced it 1 minute. They know how to find things. There's an article which I recommend take a look. It's called What is Gained in Translation. And what they did was, New York Times Book Review, they gave this little poem, The Panther, to 4 translators from German to English. And they translated and they compared the translation. I will just tell you one line and see how makes a difference. The poem, basically, I don't remember the poem, but the poem is, there's a panther in a zoo. He's going this way, he's going this way, he's going this way, he's going this way. And the author, the poet says, the bars of the zoo passed by his eyes, and the world, one writer writes, the world beyond the bars. One translator writes, the world behind the bars. Now, beyond the bars is one thing and behind the bars is another thing. And the discussion of how. Or then he says, and his long pupil suddenly opens for a minute and the world behind the bars or beyond the bars enters. The eyes goes in his heart. One translator says, and vanishes. The other says, and dies. Now, this is a very, very significant difference. So these are very subtle and important matters. Yeah.
I completely agree, and I think it might be appropriate to read a poem maybe where I was forced to be creative in some ways and deviate from the text.
You know how one gets forced by to be creative? One has to have right kind of mother.
Would you be willing to read the poet struggling against fatigue?
This is in
Freshness of the Child.
Freshness of the Child.
Yeah, this book seems to me very playful, as the name would suggest. It is about well, not about, but the
Oh, yeah.
poems
You know this poem?
many poems are playful and joyous, even if they're talking about melancholic matters, and they are springy. There's a joy of creativity in the poems, and in this one, which is based on some basically silly rhymes, but it's also in the poem that these silly rhymes have a necessity to them, but because of its apt form, it was difficult to translate it literally, so I did take
Yes,
some liberties, and you will hear what's happening in the poem, in the translation. Yeah.
It's called The Poet is Struggling Against Fatigue. The poet is struggling against fatigue. Tired and drunk, an unfit skunk. Can't tell the truth, can't tell lies, can't play games, can't catch flies, can't sing songs, can't use tongs. In such muck, he's mired. To tell you the truth, the poet is tired. Can't write a word, can't catch a bird. At such times, these silly rhymes keep him sane and dim his pain. Worth a fart, they shield his art.
Dzejnieks cīnās pret gurdumu. Guris un pillā, lempis, gorilla, nesamelot, neiedot goda vārdu, nespēlēties, ne drūmi kasīt bārdu, ne ziņģes raut, ne gaisā spļaut. Lūk, šādā muklājā ir stidzis, tā sacīt, dzejnieks, pusaizmidzis. Ne vārsmu sacerēt, ne olu paperēt. Šādos brīžos muļķa rīmes prātu dziedē, sāpes kliedē, un viegli nāk, kā bezdēt, bet ieterpi mākslu bruņu vestē. So, one of the greatest liberties is that I added a full line,
Yes.
so that I would have a rhyme possible at the
That's so nice.
at the very end. And in the first line, of course, it's no longer a skunk;
Yes.
it's a gorilla.
Because, there was a great Urdu poet, and if he didn't win a Nobel Prize, it's only because Nobel Prize involves politics, and smaller languages don't get recognized often. He had said at one place, a poet must write poetry every day, even if it's bad poetry, and even if you throw it away in the evening, but you must write. It keeps the instrument strong. And I remember writing this poem. I was actually tired, and I wanted to write a poem, and I know I couldn't. So then I wrote this poem. So one of those.
One of the qualities I very much appreciated in your poetry is that there are, in the best way possible, simple lines that nevertheless have these complex images, almost surreal images. And one poem which kind of was an enigma to me was Liquid Demon. And it took me a while to come to the idea that it's about drinking,
Yes.
that it's alcoholism as the main theme of the poem, and it also has this transformative surreal imagery.
Yes.
So maybe we could read this poem.
If either you and I were Catholic, we'll call it a confession. Okay. What? Oh, it's in this book?
Freshness of the Child.
Yeah. Let me find it. Liquid demon. Liquid demon, sometimes red, sometimes yellow, sometimes colorless, worked on this man day and night with the devotion of a Japanese chairmaker. Liquid demon turned his hands into a begging bowl, his mouth into an inverted gargoyle, his liver into sieve, his brain into a badly fried eggplant, his prose into jellyfish, his bladder into a runaway urchin, his litany into a wingless parrot, his whole existence into a tattered blanket of remorse. Liquid demand kept inviting the man into the house of spirits who could not stop visiting there.
Dzīras dēmons, dzīras dēmons, te karsti sarkans, te dzeltens, reizumis bez krāsas, mocīja vīru dienu un nakti ar japāņu galdnieka neatlaidību. Dzīras dēmons, vērta vīra plaukstas ubaga bļodā, viņa muti iekšup vemjošā notekā, viņa aknas sietā, viņa smadzenes apcepinātā baklažānā, viņa urīnpūsli paklīdušā jūras ezī, viņa prózu medūzā, viņa litāniju bezspārna papagailī, visu esību nožēlas izdauzītās seģenē. Dzīras dēmons ar vien aicināja vīru uz namu gariem, kas nemitējas rēgoties. I understand now that in the penultimate line, the house of spirits,
Yes, it's a joke. Yeah.
it's both
Yeah.
spirits as in the soul and also
Ghosts.
spirits as strong
Yes,
drinks.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. That I missed it the first
yes.
time, so now it's still
Yeah.
it's just spirits in the original in the translation. Yeah, but yeah. Okay.
See, for writing poetry, recently I wrote a paper about it in which I gave the following example. And this example came to me. These things have to come to you. You don't do them. You don't do them. You just have to be alert and receptive. Alert and receptive. You take what he gives you or what it gives you. If you are atheist, you say it's the good part of the unconscious. If you're a believer, you say it's God. It's the same thing. Because God and unconscious are actually the same thing. Because they work in their own way, in their own time. They do bad things which turn out to be good. They do good things which turn out to be bad. They will not do when they have to do. They will do when they shouldn't do. They never do things directly. They do things indirectly. God and unconscious are same. It depends upon what is your metaphor of using. So the idea came to me that the quality that you need to write a poem before the moment, the sentiment is of receptivity. You have to be open to let something happen, let something come. If it's coming, you cannot refuse it. You cannot close the door. It's a guest that has arrived, and you have to say, please come in. You cannot question the guest. You just have to take it as it is. And then you will see that the guest will make a sense. And the sense will be very interesting. But you have to wait. So to describe this process, I didn't write, it was written by me. The idea that one day you invite a woman friend of yours, say, come have dinner. And she says, I've begun dating and I have a boyfriend. Do you mind if I bring my boyfriend? You say, no, please bring your boyfriend. Time comes, you clean the house, you put some flowers, arrange some wine, you have food. And then you open the door, ting, ting, the doorbell rings. You go to the door, open the door, there's your friend who you know. She was your classmate long time ago. You give her a hug, you give her a kiss, and she is with a man. And the man has a beard which only goes up to here. One side is clean shaven and one side has a big beard. Now what? Now what? You say, please come in. And you don't say, what the fuck is wrong with you? No, you just let him come. What will you drink? You give him drink, you talk, and the whole evening goes. They arrive at 7, it's 8:30. And now people have had 2 drinks or 3 drinks. And then the man says, in case you're wondering about my half beard, let me tell you something. And he starts telling. And a very, very painful story emerges. And all kinds of things begin. And the man gets a tear rolling down his cheek, and all kinds of things happen. But this can only happen if you don't question the man when he enters. And you let a half-bearded man come in your house. And you don't think he's crazy. And you don't think your friend is crazy dating this man. He's just a man of his own kind. He likes to keep half a beard. It's okay. Then you find, same thing with poetry. I've written many poems whereby I was writing, and I'm sure you have the same experience, that you don't know what you're writing. And then after writing, either today or tomorrow or 2 months from now, then you say, oh, this is what it meant.
I think that's a brilliant metaphor because it's a beautiful lesson not to be unpolite to inspiration. Because if you doubt, if you question your inspiration, you're basically being unpolite to a guest. Yeah, that's beautiful. That's smart. Yeah. So, speaking of similes, metaphors, another thing I appreciated in the poetry is lyricism, sensuality, sexuality, love, and so on. And so in the Freshness of the Child, there's a New Delhi quartet where the urban morphs with the urban takes on a kind of body of its own. So perhaps we can share this poem.
The New Delhi Quartet, written when we were visiting New Delhi. 1. Little steps of heart's reform took the visitor miles away from the clock tower of his old pain. 2. Unable to shield her noble silence from the orange rain of city's cacophony, he stayed attuned to her soft heartbeat. 3. Upon cleaving her flesh, he forgot the distinction between arriving in a new country and returning home. 4. Next to his boisterous brown kin, the moonlight of her skin grew finer, became a white lotus seen at night.
New Delhi kvartets, pirmais. Sirds pārveidības sīkie soļi aizveda viesi prom no viņa veco sāpju pulksteņtorņa. 2. Nejaudājot viņas cēlo mieru nosargāt no pilsētas kakofonijas oranžā lietus, viņš uzskaņoja sevi maigo pukstu toņkārtā. 3. Uzšķeldams viņas miesu, saplūda nošķīrums starp ierašanos svežzemē un mājupceļu. 4. Blakus viņa bramanīgai brūnai ādai, viņas ādas mēnesnīca, plāna, balts lotos nakts melnumā.
Read yours. And that's enough of my poetry. Read yours.
My poetry?
Yeah.
Okay. I've prepared a couple of texts that I would.
There are 2 languages, so two ways of drinking water. Yeah. Bilingual. The word bilingual never had more meaning.
I'll be happy to share a couple of my
Yes.
poems, and
Yes, please.
these poems that I've prepared that are translated now into English, they are from a group of poems I wrote for the Riga Stradinj University Museum of Anatomy. So right near here, there's the Museum of Anatomy. And last year they invited me to explore their exhibition, their collection, and write poems exploring the exhibits and also the stories behind these exhibits and everything that's on display. And in May, they're going to integrate these poems with the English translations into the display for the summer season.
Wow.
And so I've been working with organs and bones and body parts. And it turned out in many cases that it is completely unknown from what kind of people these organs and body parts come from.
Yes.
They're anonymous, and in most cases probably never gave their consent to have their body parts displayed. However, there is one exhibit, that one object about which we know for sure that he devoted his body to the museum. This is the first exhibit that we see when we enter the museum. It's a full skeleton of a human, and we know to whom it belonged. It was a man by the last name of Lukstinš. And there are a few stories as to why he committed suicide, but we do know that he shot himself, writing a note beforehand about wanting his body to be in the museum. This was, and most of the collection is gathered during the 20s, 30s, and 40s in the 20th century. Yeah, the museum was established in 1920, when also the anthropological expeditions began to gather bones and so on. And I think Lukstinš shot himself in, it was definitely in the interwar period.
Already 100 years ago.
Yes, definitely, yes. And there's legends about him failing an exam. There's legends about him being desperately and futile, like in love in vain, and so on. But we know that he wanted to be there. So I wrote a poem called "The Lukstinš Effect," and I will read the Latvian first and then the English. So you asked me to give you this is the English translation. The translation is written by a very talented translator, Kintia Rogers. This is the original. Lukstiņa efekts. Es esmu viens no retajiem, kurš pats izlēma šeit atrasties. Es esmu superzvaigzne, ko nespiež uzstāties menedžeris. Un šo amatu es izcīnīju ar karstu lodi deniņos. Kāds prasīs, vai tiešām tu nevēlētos vēl reizi aiziet uz restorānu ar mīļoto un sūkāt olīvas kauliņu kā cietu krūtsgalu? Bet es esmu tieši tur, kur vēlos būt. Un es skaidri apzinos, ka tauriņš, tā saucamajā tauriņa efektā, pats nekad nepiedzīvo sevis izraisītās vētras. Es atdevu savu ribu ksilofonu nākotnes mūzikai. Dzirdat? Tur tālāk guldz mēle izmērcēta pati savā dziesmā. Aristotelis uzskatīja, ka smadzeņu uzdevums ir dzesēt sirdi. Burtiski, protams, muļķības, bet poētiski ienāciet orgānu zvaigznājā un pamēģiniet novaldīt klauves. Tieši tas ir skaistākais. Es uz mūžiem kluss, bet ieskandinu citus. Es esmu nošu partitūras kauliņi. Tu esi simfonijas gaļa. And you want to read it?
I'll read the poem in English. I am one of the few here of my own free will, I'm a self-made superstar. No manager forces me to perform. And I took this high position along with a hot bullet to my temple. Some might ask, really? Wouldn't you love one more dinner date with your loved one? One more olive pit to suck on like a hard nipple? But I am where I most long to be. And I know for certain that the butterfly of the so-called butterfly effect never gets to experience the storms it causes. I donated my rib xylophone to the music of the future. Here, in there, the tongue gongs soaked in his own song. Aristotle believed that the job of the brain is to cool down the heart, literally, sure, nonsense. But poetically, step into the zodiac of organs and try taming your racing heartbeat. That's the best part. I'm now silent forever, yet I bring forth the song of others. I am the bones of the musical score, and you are the meat of the symphony. Wow. Very good.
Thank you. Thank you for reading that.
No, so nice. So nice.
That was such.
So nice.
I'll read two more.
Yeah, of course. Please.
I wanted to demonstrate the talent of the translator, the Kinti Rogers, because she's brilliant also in working with strict forms in rhyming poetry and so on. And some of the poems I wrote for the group of the anatomical verses, they are in strict meter or with rhymes. There's one sonnet, there's one sestina, and so on. This one is just with rhymes because I thought that the subject matter contrasts with the rhyming form in a funny way. This is about a real doctor who had a real collection of bones in the 1920s, which he donated to the museum. Viesos pie Jirgeniem 1919. Cienājieties, nogaršojiet rausi, ieliešu jums kafiju, ja ļausiet. Nāciet māju apskatīties, lūdzu, neesiet nu gausi. Šeit ir īstens melnkoks, droši taustiet. Šeit ir glezna, žirafes un strausi. Un šeit ir mani 90 bērnu galvas kausi. Protams, mani itin bieži šausta, pikti kniebjot jūtīgajā ausī un prasa, kāpēc tavā kolekcijā ir 90 bērnu galvas kausi? Redziet, būdams garā rados Faustam, man nepietiek ar teoriju sausu. Man ir svēta pārliecība, kas jau apgaismības laikā pausta, ka vajag prakses kaulam cauri austies. Vienalga ir, vai mani lād vai kausta. Un tāpēc manā kolekcijā stāv 90 bērnu galvas kausi, jo jābūt kādai zīmei nenojaustai, kādam noslēpumam tur virs skausta. Kāpēc pēkšņi visi klusē? Kāpēc nēdat jūs manu rausi? You want to read it?
Yeah. Welcome to this humble house of mine. Help yourselves to to pastries and some wine. Come, I'll give you a tour. Come along. Don't lag behind. That's real ebony. Feel it. I don't mind. Here's a painting of an exotic design. And here are my 90 skulls of children aligned. Of course, I'm maligned. They pull on my ear and treat me unkind and ask, how come you have 90 skulls of children aligned? You see, Faust and I are here of like mind. Dry theory will not suffice, I find, so I cling to sacred conviction by the good old enlightenment defined. That praxis is where truth lies disguised. Sticks or stones, I won't stand for lies. Hence, you will find in my collection 90 skulls of children aligned. As there must be a secret or a hidden sign right here in this cage of bone confined. Why all of a sudden so quiet? Help yourself to some pastries and wine.
Thank you so much
Yes.
for reading that. I have a choice now to read one that's um, similar, although it's written as a song and not so serious, or to read one that's serious.
Is it Silent Ice?
Sorry?
What's the song one? Bread. Give me a piece of bread. No,
Uh,
what song? What?
if I read one more,
Yeah, of course.
from me.
From you, yes, of course.
Let's end with another bouncy text from me. Then we can return to Professor Akhtar's poetry. So not all the poems that I write for the Anatomy Museum are this like bouncy and optimistic. Some of them are obviously serious, and some. Yes. Well, no, not optimistic was the wrong word to use. Obviously. Anyway, the poem about Lukstinj, the skeleton, mentions the song, the tongue's song that gongs if you enter the museum, and so I wrote the song which the tongue sings. There are exhibits about the digestive system, and some of them are also human tongues on display. And I thought that this is metaphorically a very potent image, because the tongue obviously is the organ with which we speak and therefore create our understanding of the world. And to have that organ confined into this jar, therefore rendering it unable to speak, is not only morbid, it's also somehow metaphorically unsettling. So I wanted to give voice to this organ inside a jar, and I wrote a song. This was after I read a poem by a young poet in Latvian. There's a poet named Alice Bogdanova. She wrote, "Viņi varētu paturēt manu mēli, pārkrāsotu, iekonservētu līku, lai tā vairs nebūtu tukša muldēšana, tā būtu zinātne." So I put this as an epigraph. You'll hear the translation shortly. And the poem, the song called Mēles ziņģe, is as follows. Visu mūžu muldēdams, tagad burkā gulēdams, stundas mēmi pulēdams ar savu mīksto vīles galu, vismaz miru muldēdams. Nu netaisnību nolādēdams, ne man ēst, ne pats es ēdams, būtu gājis buldurēdams, bet tagad savā stikla zārkā netaisnību nolādēdams. Ieva rād, kas viņai rādāms, liektais auglis bija ādams. Es konservantā klusi mādams, ēdenei, kas attālinās, un Ieva rād, kas viņai rādāms. Reiz citas mēles laizīdams, visiem podus taisīdams, kašķos gaisu maisīdams, dzīvē situ, ceļus vaļā, savas lūpas laizīdams. Nu manā miesā, pelēks sārtā, man uz gala zilbe vārtās, uz manas virsmas burtiņš ārdās. Burtiņš sakāms, neizsakāms, zinātnes un baismu vārdā.
The tongue song. The tongue song. All my life, I've rattled on. In a jar now, dead and gone. wasting hours dusk till dawn, wagging my soft tongue in vain. At least I died rattling on. Oh, injustice, I'm doomed. I shall not eat nor be consumed. Instead of chatting up a storm, I'm in a coffin made of glass now. Oh, injustice, I'm doomed. Eve revealed, but things unhidden. Adam was the fruit forbidden. I bid adieu to squandered Eden, floating in a silent fluid, for Eve revealed the things unhidden. I used to lick the tongue of others, caring not for whom it bothers. Making enemies of lovers, I had a hoot and kissed some boots. But now I sense a word that hovers. Now, on my surface, pinkish grey, a syllable is on its wobbly way. A little letter I'm about to say, about to come undone, yet left unsaid in the name of science and of dread. Right.
Thank you for reading that.
Very nice, yeah.
I think a good poem to read from after landing
Yes.
now would be to the Round Bread of Music,
Oh, yes.
because we've read two. Well, we read a song. We read.
Yeah,
a
it
song,
is a song.
so-
That's what I thought. This was written of all places in Austin, Texas.
Oh.
And Austin, Texas Texas is a story, a kind of a conservative state with, we believe, in Philadelphia, Washington, New York, and Boston, we believe it's not an imaginative place. But there's a little city in entire Texas called Austin, and which is full of music, full of literature, bookshops, and very interesting city. One city in the whole state, small city. So the poem is written in Austin, if I have to find it. It's in this book. It's in this book?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'll it's called The Round Bread of Music, referring actually to a vinyl record. To a vinyl record. The round bread of music. Give me some round bread of music. Give it to me. You keep the milk of kindness, the butter of your glance, the apples of your laughter, the gin and tonic dance. But give me some round bread of music. Give it to me. You keep the silver of your body, the amethyst of your heart, the ruby of your love, the gold of your every part. But give me some round bread of music. Give it to me. You keep the smells that are only yours. Give others your healing touch. Keep what you have for yourself, but I ask for just this much. Give me the round bread of music. Give it to me.
You read it so musically that I'm now looking at the translation. So I see places to move.
Yeah.
To after hearing it,
Yes.
I'm starting to revise the translation. Yes, but I'll read
Yeah.
my version. Mūzikas apaļā maize. Dod man mazliet mūzikas apaļās maizes, dod. Paturi pieklājības pienu, sava skatiena sviestu, smieklu ābolus, savas dejas džintoniku. Bet dod man mazliet mūzikas apaļās maizes, dod. Paturi savu ķermeņa sudrabu, savu sirds ametistu, savu mīlas rubīnu un visu daļu zeltu, bet dod man mazliet mūzikas apaļās maizes, dod. Tu paturi smaržas, kas pieder tik tev, sniedz citiem dziedējošo pieduršanos. Paturi savu sev. Es prasu vien šo, dod man mazliet mūzikas apaļās maizes, dod.
What had happened, basically, I feel I have to explain it to my wife. I feel that I have to explain this poem to my wife. What had happened was that I'd gone to Austin to give some scientific papers, like psychoanalytic papers. And in the evening, they took me out for dinner. At the dinner, there was not a poet, but a famous country song singer, woman, who's made many records and who had sung country music and won some Emmy award or some such thing. And they introduced me. I shook her hand. Turns out she got some ideas about me. I had some ideas about her, but the ideas were very different. She had ideas of, more interesting type. I only was interested in, I hope she'll sing one of my poems. That's all I was interested in. So that's what it is. I said, keep your body, keep your this, just make me a vinyl record of my songs. So I think I was looking at her, at my wife, and I thought the explanation was needed.
Looking at people and
This was long before, it was 2011. Or maybe earlier, if the date is there.
people having ideas about other people. It's also a running theme in, I think, some of your poems. In The Freshness of the Child, I think there's a prose poem about someone who looks at a pregnant woman.
Yes.
And in After Landing, there's the poem Pervert, which is after
Yes.
the reading a book, Creativity and Perversion. And there's a poem that quotes Sigmund Freud, where we can see, your professional life entering your poetry, your scientific expertise entering your poetry.
In fact, now that you said, I would like to read something. It's very small, if I can find it. It's a proposal. It's in this? I think, yes, it's in this. We have some red-blooded psychoanalysts here, so they will be happy. This one. Did you ever see this? You didn't see this.
I did not translate this. No.
No,
I did not have this book. Yeah.
Okay. I would like you to privately read it, then I'll read it aloud. So read it quietly yourself, then give it to me, then I'll read it aloud.
Okay.
Yeah.
This one, the proposal.
Yeah. Just to read to yourself. It's a privilege he should have. Yeah. Okay. A proposal. It's a very small prose piece. The renowned South American archaeologist, Lorenzo Hernandez, whose father had undergone psychoanalysis with Sigmund Freud, recalled the following memory in his own treatment decades later. As a young man, Lorenzo had once made love with a pretty, maternally tender and cultured girl from the affluent neighborhood he lived in. As their encounter progressed, he was astonished by her sexual adroitness, skill. He was astonished by her sexual adroitness and overjoyed by his own exceptional potency that afternoon. Sheepishly, Lorenzo reported to his analyst the following day that just when he was about to reach climax, he found himself blurting out to the girl, "Will you consider being my father's wife?" This was to the analysts.
Well, I did translate the poem Pervert.
Yes.
Which is I think also a very interesting subject to write about. And after that, the poem Pain,
Okay.
which quotes Sigmund Freud, which is a beautiful lyrical poem. Yeah.
The first poem was written after I finished reading the French psychoanalyst Janine Chasseguet-Mergel, her book Creativity and Perversion. Yeah.
I'll read the Latvian first.
You tell me.
The
English.
English.
It's in this book.
It's in Latvia Landing, yes. Yeah. This poem has...
It's a sad poem. No, it's sad and dirty poem. But the topic itself is sad and dirty. So what can you do?
To me, it's a poem with alliteration.
Yeah. The pervert. For Janine Chasseguet-Mergel, after reading her 1984 book, Creativity and Perversion. Dancing Lucifer-like in gleeful abandon. Dancing Lucifer-like in gleeful abandon, erect in mocking defiance, drooling with the greed of flesh, drowning in the flushed toilet of his mind, breaking, bending, masking, distorting, toppling the order of things, creating a purple pantheon of painful privacy and poisoned pleasure.
Izvirtulis Žanīnai Chasseguet-Mergelei pēc viņas 1984. gadā izdotās grāmatas Radošums un perversija izlasīšanas. Dejo kā Lucifers līksmā, bezprātā, sacēlies musinošā izsmieklā, alkaini pēc miesas nosiekalojies, slīkst savas apziņas nenorautā podā, lauž lietas, slēpj, groza, nojauc visu lietu kārtību un rada purpura panteonu no privātas plosīšanās un pūstoša prieka. It's a
Yeah.
Phonetically,
Yeah.
it's a phonetically punchy ending
Yes.
to the poem. And after this, I wanted to read the poem "Pain," which is a lyrical poem, and it's short. The one with the quote by Sigmund Freud.
Yeah, I forgot. But I'm no longer in pain, by the way. This book is 2011 or 12. So I'm no longer in that pain. Sometimes this happens. People ask you to read a poem that is gone from your heart. In Urdu, I go to places to recite poetry. People say, recite that poem. That poem was written then. I don't feel that. So I'm not genuinely feeling the emotion I'm now reading. So I don't know. This poem I've not seen for years, but I'll see, you know. I'll see where it is. Oh yeah. Pain. And there's a quotation, epigraph by Freud. We are never as defenseless as when we are in love. We are never as defenseless as we are in love. This from Civilization and Discontents. 1 year after which your house was made. Your house was made in 1931. Freud wrote 1930. A red envelope marked pain arrives in the mailbox of my heart. A red envelope marked pain arrives in the mailbox of my heart just as your feet that support your legs, your hips, your breasts, and your unforgettable face pause in their lyrical approach towards me.
Sāpes visneaizsargātākie esam tad, kad esam iemīlējušies. Zigmunds Freids, 1930. gadā. Sarkana aploksne ar uzrakstu sāpes iekrīt manas sirds pastkastītē, gluži kā tavas pēdas, kas balsta tavas kājas gurnus, tavas krūtis un nedzēšamo seju, iepauzē savā liriskajā ceļā pie manis. Well, if painful poems is not the agenda,
Yeah.
maybe we can read a boy I know from the freshness of the child.
You could, but if you don't mind, I'll read
course, of
something
course.
else.
Of course.
That's about Ozan, yeah. This poem you don't have because you don't have this book. So I'll read it. Your English is impeccable, so you'll follow it anyway. It's called Defenses. Defenses. I want a giraffe with a goat's neck. I want a giraffe with a goat's neck and a dog that flies in the air. I want a mountain of water and a lake filled with iron. I want a soundless song and a whistling grave. I want a tree that walks and a train that goes nowhere. I want a 4-year-old grandmother and a 13 feet tall son. Only having all this can stop me from falling in love with you. And when we reach last, tell me, I want to reach this one last. We should be reaching last, I think. What time is it? 50?
So-
550. We should. Yeah.
Technically, we have still 45 minutes. So we do have. I have translations to read, depending on how you're feeling.
Let's just stop at 5:30. Yeah, how about we stop 5:30? Yes, that's a good point. In Urdu. Yeah, we stop at 5:30. Yeah. So why don't you read your stuff? Read another poem of yours. Because
Okay.
you have read so few of yours. You read one, and then I'll read one in Urdu, and then one in English, then we stop.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. This
Yeah,
is
this one.
translation.
Yeah.
So I will read a serious poem, also from the Anatomy group cycle, the group of poems. They have a room in the Anatomy Museum for pathologies, birth pathologies, most of which are now dealt with early on, but occurred up until the 70s still. And one of the specimens is the so-called Janus twin, which is a very rare, you probably know, the very rare condition where a child is born with one head, 2 faces, and 2 bodies. And I was visiting this room, thinking about it, thinking about what it means to the people going to that room, and I was told by the museum experts that we still don't really know 70% of the reason why such pathologies occur. We know that sometimes it's genetics and sometimes it's different environmental conditions, right? Drugs and so on. But those account for 30% of the time, for the cases, and 70% of the time, we still don't know why these pathologies occur. And I was thinking about this, and I wrote a poem. Jānus Dvīnis. Kāpnes ved šajā gadījumā lejup zem ielas līmeņa, pagraba sānu istabā bez logiem. Aiz bieza stikla, zaļi caurspīdīgos traukos peld cilvēku augļi ar anomālijām. Fotografēt aizliegts, it kā tās būtu neatrisinātas krimināla lietas, pa pusei apraktas, bet arvien atvērtas. Jaundzimušais ar divām sejām, divām zilbēm jautājumā, kāpēc, kas paliks neatbildēts. Un vai atbilde mierinātu? Tāpat teiktu, mēs būtu gribējuši pieredzēt, kā tu atklāji, cik garšīgs ir piparmētru saldējums. Kā tu uzzini, cik skaisti ir piedalīties stāvovācijās. Kā tu aizbrauc uz Luvru, apskati viņu iestikloto dzīvajā, atskāršot, mazāka nekā iztēlojies. Bet tev tika 2 reizes vairāk dzīvības, un citi jau vienu nespēja izturēt. 2 reizes spilgtāka gaisma, 2 reizes smagāki mākoņi virs Rīgas, un ārstu satrauktie čuksti 2 reizes skaļāki. Tik īsā mūžā var viegli saredzēt gan pagātni, gan nākotni, jo sākums un gals ir saauguši kopā.
Janus's twin. The stairs lead, in this case, down, below street level, into a windowless room. Behind the thick glass, in green translucent vessels, float human fetuses with anomalies. No photography allowed. As though these were cold cases, partially buried but still unresolved. A newborn with 2 faces, 2 syllables of how come, left unanswered. Would any answer suffice? Still, we'd say, we'd love to see you discover how good peppermint ice cream tastes. You feel the beauty of joining others in a standing ovation. You go to the Louvre, look at her, locked in glass in person, realizing, hey, she's smaller than you imagined. But you had twice the amount of life, when so often one is too much to bear. Light twice as bright, double the weight of clouds over Riga, and the concerned whispers of doctors twice as loud. In such a brief life, we clearly see both past and future, for the beginning is attached to the end.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, I'll recite one Urdu poem, and then one this, and then that.
Yes.
Urdu poem, I'll say in Urdu, then translate. It's a short poem. It says a request. In Urdu, darkhwast. आज की रात कोई सच ना कहो. आज की रात कोई सच न कहो. आज बस वक्त को टल जाने दो. झूठ से दिल को बहल जाने दो. मुझको थोड़ा सा संभल जाने दो. आज की रात कोई सच न कहो. आज बस वक्त को टल जाने दो. झूठ से दिल को बहल जाने दो. मुझको थोड़ा सा संभल जाने दो. कल तो सूरज की हथेली पे मचलता हुआ सच फिर हर एक सिमत बिखर जाएगा. जहर बनकर मेरी नस नस में उतर जाएगा. आज की रात निकल जाने दो. आज की रात कोई सच ना कहो. Tonight, don't speak any truth. Let the time pass. Let me be entertained with lies. Let me gather myself and stay a little stable. Tomorrow, the truth will be dancing on the palm of the sun. And it'll be everywhere, and it'll enter my blood vessels and like a poison spread through my body. So tonight, I request, don't tell any truth. Let me stay with lies. Let time pass. So, and then I want to end with this poem. It's called The Limit of Instruction. How much can you teach? the limit of instruction. The master said, write every day, even if you throw it away. The disciple said, but am I not to wait for the muse to arrive and the inspiration to arise? The master said, writing is not worship. Writing is building a temple. The disciple said, but aren't poets like prophets? And isn't the Holy Quran written entirely in verse? The master said, you confuse buried treasures with daily wages. The disciple said, but I want to be respected by all. I want to become famous, and I want to take many women as my lovers. The master said, go away. My wife is listening. Okay.
So since I don't have the translation of this poem, I will stay silent in the face of the master and to say a great thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for coming. Yeah.